Bed falls and hot water burns are sending more children to the emergency room. Between the years 2013 and 2016, a new study looked at over 2,000 injured infants less than 1 year of age who had been admitted to the Red Cross Children's Hospital's trauma unit. Now, according to a study by the University of Cape Town, falls and burns significantly contributed to the burden of infant injuries. The study also found that physical and sexual assault contributes to the cause of infant injuries. For more now, I'm joined by the author of the study, Professor Sebastian Van As, who's a professor at UCT and former head of the trauma unit at Red Cross War Memorial Children's Hospital. And he joins us virtually this evening from Polokwane in Limpopo. Prof, thank you so much for your time this evening. I believe this study is the first in South Africa to investigate the exact causes of infant injury. That does seem peculiar in that one would think that the health of our most vulnerable in society, this kind of study would have been very, very important. Why was that study undertaken at this time, and how did you set up the study?
Well, thank you very much, Marcel, for inviting me to be on your program. Childhood injuries are very important. People think children dying from TB or other infectious diseases or malnutrition, but actually, if you look at the whole world, between the age of 1 and 18, the most common cause of death for children are accidents and injuries. So at the Red Cross Children's Hospital, we've got a collaboration with the Erasmus University in Holland. That collaboration has been running for about 15 years, and we get students from the Netherlands, and they perform study on our statistics. So we collect data on each and every child which comes to the Red Cross Children's Hospital, and we document all the details: how the child is injured, the age of the child, how long the child is in hospital, and all these things. So we've published many articles, but this is for the first time a study looking at the children under the age of 1. Now, the interesting thing is that the smaller the child, the more vulnerable for accidents and injury. And the main reason is that children under the age of 6, they are neurodevelopmentally immature, so they cannot protect themselves like adults can. We know what are the dangers in our environment, and we can stay away from it. But kids under the age of 6, and definitely kids under the age of 1, which this study is talking about, they have to be protected. So the interesting thing is that the most common cause for children to be injured and end up in the hospital is children falling.
Now allow me just to come in there, because I do want to give our viewers just some numbers before you dig down into what those numbers tell us. According to your study, falls were the most frequent cause of injury, comprising 42% of all injuries, and falls from the bed accounted for almost half of those fall injuries at 49%. Now, if you split up those different kinds of falls, what do you read into that information?
So what is interesting, Marcel, that you asked is, children under the age of 1, how can they fall? Of course, they can fall from a surface. So if you put them on a bed or on a table, and for instance, the mother is turning it back to pick up a new, a clean nappy or whatever, then the child can quickly go to the side of the table or to the side of the bed and fall. But kids under the age of 2 or 3 months, they are unable to turn around. Now, in spite of the fact that kids are unable physically to turn around themselves and to crawl, we still had a lot of children, about half the kids who fell under the age of 3 months. The story was that they fell from the bed. Now, that of course put into doubt the veracity of the story. So something else may have happened, and the people who bring the child to hospital may tell you the child fell from the bed, but it could have been perhaps another mechanism of injury which occurred.
Now, the second most common cause of injury was burn injuries, in that total group 32%, and were more often seen in male as opposed to female infants. Hot water burns contributed to over 80% of all burns. And you go further to speak about when kids become more mobile, this becomes more of an issue. Now, I must say, I've got a 20-month-old at home, and these numbers just came at me in waves, because as they get older, as they become more mobile, you just don't have enough arms to make sure that they stay out of peril and to make sure that everything is out of their way. But we also know that we've got different households with different status of privilege. And for instance, I have a stove that's quite high, so I can ensure that my pot's handles are completely out of the way. But we also know so many South Africans depend on a gas stove of some kind that probably has to stand on the ground, and that makes it even easier for a curious toddler to get to. What did you read into those kinds of numbers in your study?
Yes, you're spot on, Marcel. Children who come from previously disadvantaged or currently disadvantaged environments, and we talk about shanty towns and informal settlements, very often these houses, they consist of one room. And in that room, there is no separation between living room, kitchen, bedroom. So all these activities occur in one room. And of course, if cooking takes place, especially in a gas heater, kids are extremely vulnerable because they don't know the dangers of flare current and hot pots. And the only thing what we can do is trying to keep the kids away from any hot object or liquid as far as you can. The kids will always go, and they're very inquisitive. So if there's a pot on the table with a handle sticking out, they will try to grab that. If there's a kettle with a kettle cord hanging from the kitchen sink, and it's going down, and the child often, especially in the age of going to walk from crawling, they will try to pull themselves up on the kettle cord, and then in that process they pull the boiling kettle with the water over themselves. So it's absolutely true that kids from disadvantaged environments are far more vulnerable for all kinds of injuries. And the other interesting thing which you mentioned is that boys, I worked in the children's hospital for 21 years, and during that whole period, I've seen thousands of kids, and boys are twice as common injured as girls. And probably this testosterone is the biggest risk factor for kids to be injured, because I don't know what it exactly does, but kids, male children are far more inquisitive. They're always taking also more risk. So if you get a boy at home of 20 months, then you must be very careful and make sure that he's never alone and never in an environment where there is dangers such as electricity, hot objects, hot liquids. Don't put them on any elevated surface from which you can fall. So it's a 24/7 job to look after children, especially in under the age of 6.
Indeed, you also spent some time in the study, of course, it being a serious issue in South Africa, looking at assault and the numbers there that it's caused in terms of infant deaths. 84 infants in that group that you studied were injured due to being struck. What did your study tell you about the numbers of kids who were being assaulted, physically assaulted, and indeed sexually assaulted as well?
Yeah, that's a very sad point, that kids under the age of 1, they also are victim of assault. If you look at the kids from 0 to 12, the rate of children who are abused is about 1 in 25%. But in this study, in children under the age of 1 year, infants, we had 3% of the kids were assaulted. And most of them were struck by a blunt object or a fist. 82% were physically assaulted and 14% sexually assaulted, and then we had 4% of kids which were just neglected or abandoned. So it's very sad that young children are also vulnerable, are more vulnerable for assault than bigger children. And of course, a child is completely vulnerable in the way that they cannot defend themselves. Any adult who is assaulted can run away or hit back. So the child can't do that, and definitely not a child under the age of 1. So actually the interesting thing is that if you look at severe forms of child abuse, in which children are severely brain damaged or even die, that actually occurs all under the age of 3. It's very rare for children over the age of 3 to be murdered, but if it's under the age of 3, they are more vulnerable for this.
You mentioned in your study, or in the executive statement on the study, that there is a suggestion through your study that abuse is being under-recognized and that a use of a screening tool at the trauma unit should be considered. What did you mean by that? What do you believe is needed so that we can try and alert the people that need to be alerted that you might be dealing with a case of abuse in your children's trauma unit?
It's a very good question. So all over the world, children who are abused, not only in South Africa, all over the world, in America, they very often, the abuse is not picked up. So we all know the story that if a young woman comes with a black eye, and it's obviously performed by the boyfriend or the husband, she'll say she fell from the stairs. So people do not want to disclose that there is domestic violence. And it's the same with kids. If kids cannot talk themselves, then the story completely is depending on what the person who brings the child to hospital, what they tell you. And very often, of course, if they are involved in either the neglect or they know something is wrong, or they did abuse themselves or their husband, they do not want to indicate that. So they will just come up with a story that the child fell from the stairs. And then often what we pick up is in the evening, so the child is admitted as a fall from the stairs. And then in the evening, someone else comes from the family and they say, oh yeah, you fell from the table, isn't it? And then you think, how is it possible? You cannot fall from the stairs and the table. There are different mechanisms. So obviously they're making up the story. So the statement we made is, and we started doing it in collaboration with the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, to have a detailed questionnaire of about 20 questions detailing the mechanism of the injury. So we'll ask them exactly what was the exact time that it happened. Was there someone else in the room who saw, who witnessed it? Or did it happen before? And they developed a questionnaire with approximately 20 questions. And there, from that questionnaire, you can very clearly get an idea if it is kosher or not kosher. So if there is something wrong or if they're making the story up. So we start implementing that, and we will probably soon start to publish on the results of that questionnaire as well.
Well, that's certainly encouraging, a step in the right direction. Thank you so much for your time this evening, and indeed the work being done continued to be done by you and your team. That was Professor Sebastian Van As, author of this very important study. He's also a professor at UCT. We thank him for his time this evening.